Leadership Quest of the Global South, Representation, Development, and the Changing World Order. Okay, today my name is Agung Nurwijoyo, serving you as the moderator in this seminar. And this is very a delightful moments, yeah, for us to discuss about the Global South Quest. Yeah, and today discussion is particularly important because we are witnessing a period of profound transformations in world politics today. Um, and major conflicts, crisis, strategic competition unfolding today are taking place in or directly affecting global South countries today. And then this discussion is also deeply meaningful, considering the historical legacy of Bandung, 1955. And today, this year, we are commemorating 71 years of ASEAN African Conference and Asia African spirit, solidarity, which emphasize sovereignty, cooperation, resistance against dominations. Before we begin our discussion, allow me to introduce our distinguished speakers today. We have the first one, we have Professor Tang Xiaoyang from Tsinghua University, China. Welcome, Professor Tang. And then also we have Associate Professor Susan Engel, University of Wollongong, Australia. Welcome, Dr. Susan. Okay. And then also we have Associate Professor Makmur Keliat from University of Indonesia, Pak Makmur. And then we also have Associate Professor Manoj Kumar Panigrahi from Jindal Global University, India. Welcome, Manoj. Okay, thank you. And then after this, thank you for very much for joining us and contributing for these important conversations. And then for the format of today's seminar, each speaker will first deliver their remarks and insight in maximum 15 minutes. Yeah. And after that, I will moderate the discussion. We have Q&A sessions, and we also have students to can give such a questions or feedback about the topics that we are discuss today. Okay. Without further ado, I will invite Professor Tang Xiaoyang to give insight and remarks about the leadership quest of the Global South. For Professor Tang, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Aaron. And also thank you very much for the invitation to join this meaningful and important seminar. I'm doing a visiting exchange at UI. And it's really a pleasure to be here and to share these views among the global South. Although Australia is not politically really global South, but it is in the South, really. But in fact, when we talk about this leadership quest, and it's very important that Aaron mentioned actually as early as the Bandung conference, the global, so that time the so-called third world, actually they tried to unite and tried to also form some leadership in the international system. But I would say the effort from this Bandung conference, it's quite different from today. Because in that time, it's mainly this independent country and with the anti-imperialist and anti-colonialist spirit, then they joined together and to want to really have this political voice expressed after centuries long colonialism, and it's the first time these developing countries, non-Western countries, they can express their voice. So that time, the leadership it's mainly among these newly independent states, and it has a particular just direction, a political direction against the imperialism. But today, almost 70 years, yeah, more than 70 years after the Bandung Conference, we are in a quite different world. As the global south, which is also just became more and more popular. And the term itself actually indicates something interesting because we know this south-north division was invented as early as this Cold War period. And originally, it just suggests the poor, yeah, the underdeveloped South, how they should resist this pressure or hegemony from the North. But actually later, but during last maybe 50, 60 years, people first like to use the third world and then later try to use the developing world, the developing countries, this concept. And that concept also, especially the developing world, it mainly just means the economic consideration, right? So this is also the trend, maybe in the 80s, in the 90s. But now in 2000, after 2010, why the global south, this term again became popular. I think this is one important reason is actually the developing countries as a group, they indeed achieved development so that they are no longer so developing according to the economic standards. So because IMF or World Bank, they all have this threshold. And now a lot of the previous developing countries, they surpassed that standard, like Singapore, like yeah, other countries, yeah, even mainland China is now almost like at the almost entering the developed country, so that this developing country just as an economic definition can no longer say so much on this countries as a group. But however, in spite of their economic development, we see countries, this non-Western advanced countries or advanced economies, then they actually still have their political intention or direction, which are different from the past traditional Western hegemony. Because like China, actually they still, in fact, in China's official narration, it still says China is the biggest developing country. China will always be a part of developing country. So China, in spite of its economic advancement, they think the developing country as a category actually means something. And I will say this view is not only like limited to China, but also shared by more and more countries with dissatisfaction against the existing previous like world order or world system. And but of course there are diverse, even with some common interest, but there are still a lot of diverse opinions. Like we see Brazil also as a global south, although its economy also are quite advanced, and even Russia, the previous first world, or Yeah, someone say second word, but let's it's arguable. But actually, yeah, they never belonged to third world, but now actually they in fact was even actively like trying to join this global south, although it's in such a north place. Yeah, but I visited Moscow 2024, and I asked the foreign ministry that question specifically, and they confirmed that they belong to global south according to their current identification. And but this global south just becomes such a wide spread term, and it also means like the majority of the world. So over a country, over 100 countries can be identified as global south. So these countries, I think for them, their common interest is actually to break the previous, like the Euro or the American-centric world order. They just think this previous inherited from the colonial period, but also enhanced by the Bretton Woods system. This yeah, the dominant Western-centric system actually in the world, they no longer really fit the current international political economic situation. So therefore then they also call for leadership. Then this leadership, they are no longer just a specific group, no longer just a voice want to be heard, but they will really want to also become the leader to really create a system in the world for the future. And I also would say, yeah, the global south, in that contrast, I also say it's not really a cold war, because for me, then global south, its opposite is not really the north, it's actually the west. Yeah, it's so it's not like directly vis-a-vis relationship, but it's actually a competition, like some disagreement, but there are also a lot of space for collaboration and for convergence. Because the global south, during their rise, it's exactly the things like the globalization in 1990s. The developing countries, many developing countries grabbed this chance and were able to profit from the market, from this capital flow, and from this increasing connection between countries to develop their economy. So that's why also it's called global south, because this the southern country is no longer just refers to poverty, but also to its globalization. Through the globalization, and then they have achieved their development of different from the West. So these countries, on the one hand, they really stress the importance of global connection. So even when the West, which is actually initiated the globalization, but now they are calling for deglobalization, decoupling. But the global south actually very strongly advocate the global connection and the increasing market integration. Like in Indonesia, not only you have ASEAN as a regional alliance, but you also then join the BRICS and actively expand your global connection. And this is also the trend for this global south. They want to create a system which is new, but also not totally different from the older one. So that's the basis for this developing countries, previous developing countries now able to become the leaders, because they actually represent not only the majority, but even the trend of convergence in the whole world. Yeah, while the West actually is trying to do decoupling, trying to protect their previous privileges. The global South, they didn't have privilege in the past. They rather was called for like a fair treatment, called for equality. And when they actually rose, they also didn't want privilege, but they just want more like a equal treatment. That's, I think, also when China is saying China is still will always be a part of developing world. When Russia actually came down to join the global South, and they all express rather this views. But of course, there are some also nuanced difference. But at least we see this trend is we are trying to give away this older system and try to live in a more equal and multipolar world. And in that part, then the global South will play the leading role. So that's what I understand by this leadership of the global South. It's not to become another like a pole, another hegemony, but it's to drive a transformation of the global system to make it to become equal and become to achieve common prosperity. And with this spirit, then all the countries which agree can have consensus on this goal, they can become leaders and they can contribute to the trend of this new global development. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Tang. Give applause to Professor Tang, please. Okay, I think this is very important. Two main points that Professor Tang trying to mention us that he remind us that we are in different circumstances, Professor Tang. From the Bandung's circumstances, Bandung situation at that time and today is much more different. And the second one, also a transformation of the role of the global South in the world politics today. I think, and we got so many insight. Thank you, Professor Tang, for your insight. And before we continue to Associate Professor to Susan Engel, before I would like to welcome the Professor Effie as a Dean of Faculty of Social and Political Sciences. Yeah. And also welcome Head of Department, Mas Broto Wardoyo. Yeah. Okay. Next, I would like also to invite the second speaker, yeah, Associate Professor Susan Engel, yeah, to give your own remarks and insight about the Global South itself. Please.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for the invitation. I'm, yes, from the University of Wollongong, and that is the traditional lands of the Wadi Wadi people of Dharawal Nation. So it's Aboriginal land whose sovereignty was never ceded. And I know I'm coming here as the white colonial settler Australian, although from a migrant background on the panel. So I'm framing my remarks in terms of not desiring to define anything about leadership for the South, but rather a bit about my inspirations and the ideas that have driven my work, which are as much about critically looking at the actions of the North, but and have taken inspiration from some of the things that Professor Tang talked about in terms of issues from the South. I've organised my remarks a little bit around the structure of the questions, so I hope I'm not going to repeat too much of what's in the questions. But when I looked at them, I guess I went back to my first principles and was thinking theoretically about what I think about issues of leadership. And I'm a neo-Gramscian scholar, so I went back to Gramsci, and Gramsci has a lot to say about leadership. Gramsci talks about leadership through an overall lens of hegemony building hegemonic leadership. And Gramsci says this occurs not when there's domination by force, but by consent through political and ideological leadership. And it requires the construction of hegemonic blocks through leadership alliances and networks across the layers of economic, political, and civil society. Gramsci also gave specific attention to the role of ideology or the framing of knowledge as a key terrain for hegemonic struggles. And he highlighted the role of traditional intellectuals versus organic intellectuals, the traditional intellectuals representing mostly the ruling bloc. Organic intellectuals can either, you can be on either side of the hegemonic terrain in those debates. So while I'm interested in questions around leadership and alliances, the fundamental core concern in my work has always been what social project is being advanced and how consent is being organised. Is that project extractive or emancipatory? And I think that's something, again, Professor Tang has already touched on. In my kind of current project that I'm just starting on, which is looking at Australian foreign economic policy through a North-South lens, I've taken quite a bit of inspiration from the Indian journalist, activist, and scholar Vijay Prashad. His 2007 book on the poorer nations, a possible history of the global South, argues that the Third World was a project, not a place, a project of bread, peace, and justice. And it's that project that Prashad and many others, scholars and activists around the world want to reclaim for what, is again being often called the Third World, in trying to reclaim that original Third World project. And drawing off the Third World in the conception that the French sociologist Salvi, I think his name was, used the conception of the Third World as being like the third estate, challenging in the French Revolution, challenging the hegemonic system. So yes, I use, I follow Prashad and sometimes using Third World Project, but I'll often use the global North and South as well. And these are all problematic shorthands, I think, too. So I've always been interested in looking at ways that the northern states engage with the southern projects to inhibit it or support it. And when I look back to the history, some of which you touched on, I think in terms of the different forms that have shaped that debate, from the intellectual leadership of people like Prebisch, W.E.B. Du Bois, Samir Amin, the cultural leadership that I think we can't forget, to the wonderful Chilean poet Pablo Neruda comes to mind, the political leaders, not least of whom, of course, is the charismatic Suharto, as well as the movements they created like NAM. And I think of their modern contemporaries when I'm trying to think about what contemporary Southern leadership looks like. In terms of how that's shaped South-South cooperation, again, like turning from Gramsci into more political economy, into neo-Gramscian political economy, they would emphasize that leadership is not just shaped by those concerns, but the global political economy, transnational governance norms, international organizations, donor agendas, managerial templates, and more. So leadership is not just purely local, it's always shaped by global hegemonies too. And I think we can really see that with the history of South-South cooperation. I think building again a bit on what Professor Tang said, I'd say in its early phases coming from Bandung and later under the non-aligned movement, it promoted a vision of emancipatory state-led development with the global South, working in solidarity against the global North, and envisaged a broad range of economic, cultural, and technical cooperations initiatives amongst countries. But that political cooperation had been broken by the start of the 1970s. It was revived a bit by Algerian President Houari Boumediene at the fourth non-aligned summit in 1973, which led to the declaration of a new international economic order. And with some colleagues, we put out a special issue on that new economic order last year in Development and Practice. But Boumediene also represented, and I'm probably butchering his name, please forgive me. Boumediene also represented a wave of military takeovers that was part of the end of the Third World Project. And despite the NIEO being adopted without a vote at the UN Sixth Special Assembly of the General Assembly, the Global North quickly realised that the oil weapon couldn't be extended to other commodities, and the burden of adjustment of the oil crisis could be put on to the Global South, or effectively shifted to the Global South. And that was the time that an administrative apparatus was built around what became the structure of South-South cooperation. It started in 1978 with the UN Buenos Aires Plan of Action, and mostly focused on technical cooperation among developing countries, and led to the office of a UN Office of South-South Cooperation. And I think that period from around 78 really saw South-South cooperation transform into little more than a liberal norm based on technical cooperation. But then, as we've talked about, the rise of the BRICS, which was tied all together, I think, by the boost that China's economic growth gave to the global economy and the global commodities super cycle that all of that produced, challenged the picture. But I guess I agree ultimately with Ravi Palat's assessment written back in 2008 that the BRICS challenge to the Euro-North American domination of world affairs has been timid, though they certainly generated some new contest over aid purposes and geographies in the 2010s. But then in the wake of COVID, declining Chinese aid, the Ukraine-Russia war, and the Great Aid Recession of 2005, much of that debate has been moot too. And in terms of another area of my particular research and expertise, the BRICS did engage in attempted reform of the Bretton Woods twins, the World Bank and IMF, for a decade from around the mid-2000s. And the US blocked even simple quota and shareholder reforms, which I think demonstrates the limitation of reform agendas where you have international organizations controlled by states through shareholdings rather than a democratic one country, one vote principles. And so in response, of course, the BRICS created the new Development Bank collectively in 2015, demonstrating an alliance strategy. And then China created the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, taking the lead on its own in 2016, but then very quickly needing other states to join to gain legitimacy for the organization. But in both cases, these multilateral development banks adopted a traditional multilateral development bank form. They followed the form established by the other banks. And they didn't even try and stretch that mold really to create what was perhaps some of Keynes's original vision for the World Bank of more of a credit cooperative. They didn't reach that far. And what we've seen is they have really adopted the norms and the mechanisms and structures of multilateral development finance, hence the conclusion in my 2021 book with Adrian Basbowers that they are part of a global architecture of multilateral development banks. And it's still a system that is more about debt than about development. But still, Southern leaders could attempt to reform. But I think I'll leave those there and save some of these other comments for the discussion. I hope that's some useful, provocative thoughts and taking a more theoretical approach. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Susan, for your insight and your important points about the Global South leadership and the strategy of Global South countries managing in the turbulence situation in the world today. Okay, thank you again. Now, I would like also to invite the third speaker, Associate Professor Manoj Kumar from Jindal University.
Okay.
Manoj,
Hello, everyone.
floor is yours.
Sorry, I thought I was the fourth speaker. Wow. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me in this wonderful discussion. I was told I was given like two questions to discuss, and I'll probably take more say not much into like go beyond what Professor Angel just mentioned, more theoretical, but more like from an Indian perspective. I'm from India, so I'll take more from an Indian perspective. The first was about the impact of great power rivalry on global South. Uh, Before I start this discussion, what are the strategic choices in autonomy? I'll say one practical experience from India. I probably it's maybe same in few other the so-called global South is that in India we fight for becoming poor for there is something called BPL card. Now, that's the below poverty line. So what happens if any family have this ID as a BPL card, then you get government subsidy for like rations like rice, lentils, and so and so. Like it's basically takes care of almost or more than of your monthly groceries. I remember my neighbor's back door of our where we live. They they are quite comfortable, but they also have this kind of cards. Okay, so that led to what? That led to a decrease of government like efficiency in many cases due to corruption, and I think that's why this term is that in India is a country where everyone fights to become poor until the governments came in and then there's a digital check on based on your social security numbers and a lot of this sort of cases were like found out that being they don't deserve this kind of subsidies. Okay, so I think exactly when we call about global north and south, that's where the difference is like the countries are fighting. Oh, I feel like I'm in the global north, but because I feel like I'm bigger than this, and there are a few countries like, oh, I'm in the global south because I can have a better economic opportunities from the so-called global north countries, and so and so in terms of subsidies or FTAs and so. Um, well, I'll try to bring this into three different sections. One would be on economic opportunities and risks. I think the great power competition did lead to bring in more investments from all sides into the larger global south. And I usually consider this sort of rivalry more like being used by the smaller nations in terms of hedging, in terms of hedging, and when you talk about IR theories and for increased investments for tariff-free trade deals and closely which are closely linked to geopolitical realities which have led to the importance of global south countries with great powers. I've and also like countries in global south do realize the importance of hedging and balancing acts they need and the acts they need to in selection of the strategic choices. Undermining one of them can cause to be branded as belonging to a particular country's camp, just like we saw during the Cold War times. And also with the increase of AI and other technological advancements, it is necessary for the countries, usually in the global south, to get regular investments in the fast-changing technological aspects for job creation and increasing their values as their so-called strategic partners or like-minded partners for the global north countries. To make this, I want to give you the example of India in terms of FTAs, like free trade agreements. In the past 10, 15 years, India signed like six major FTAs, as recently with New Zealand, this earlier this month. And yes, on April 27 to May 4th, they have signed the FTAs. So, and also with the EU, and there's a multiple other FTA talks are being conducted with US, South Africa, and other major countries around the world. So that has, if you see the India's engagement, of course, it was as Professor mentioned about the Bandung conference. India was the one of the major, also the founding member of the so-called non-alignment movement. But over the years, we see India has moved away from this non-aligned, but more on a terms of strategic alignment rather than a non-alignment approach. And this has led to India as a country to focus more on minilateralism, where it is more focused and also in more in terms of bilateral way. If our friends can recollect, when India was hosting the G20 summit 2 years back, and there was a statement that came out all the time that India is the Vishwa Guru. Vishwa Guru is the term that was used by the government of India. And Vishwa here it means the world, and Guru means the teacher. So, but it faced a lot of criticism at this particular point of time, where India was trying to becoming as the voice of the global South, but at the same time, when you say I'm the world's teacher, this was quite contradictory to what the statements was. So, post G20 summit, the terms that started like was rephrased by the government of India. From Vishwaguru, they changed this term to Vishwa Bandhu. That's meaning as Vishwa is again the world, and Bandhu means friend. So we are the world's friend. So if you see the government of India's official documents before G20 and post G20 summit that was hosted, so these are the two different ways that India has tried to do it. And contradictory to all the FTAs that India has been signing till today, in all the FTAs that India has signed, India has always been at the loss, like in terms of trade imbalance. So it's quite surprising to many. I'm not an economist, but surprising to many economists that why India is still in favor of signing FTAs when it is almost of the time till today has been at the loss. Second comes into the political influence and sovereignty. Countries in global south are often expected to voice the support to the major powers, leading the countries in global south as a strategic battlegrounds, which can be seen as a new form of Cold War, but instead of a bipolar world, we are seeing a more of a multipolar world. External influence can lead to a further downgrading of the countries, creation of violence, war, insurgency, and economic collapse. Again, for this, I'll give you the example of Nepal. The competition, because Nepal is a buffer state between Nepal, India, and China. Just 2 days back, Nepal government came out with a statement that both India and China have to stop a particular, let's say, a religious travel route that allegedly passes through the Nepal's territory, which has been apparently with the Nepal territory since 1800s, but at present it is kind of controlled by under the administrative control of India and China. So we see this small nations can also create, and Nepal is heavily dependent on India for its gas and other economic aspects, and so do with China for the major investments from both India and China. But countries, Nepal can and have become, for example, Nepal has have been the battleground, or as recent as it is, the Chinese government have also. I study cross-strait relations quite closely. So the Chinese government recently gave FTAs to tariff-free trade to all the African nations except one, that's Eswatini, which has the diplomatic relations with Taiwan. So again, it's due to the political influence of and to kind of give you the carrots and stick approach that has been also used for the global South countries. Last to on this is the fragmentations in global systems, and the great power rivalry has also led to the fragmentations in global systems, such as regional organizations, where consensus is required to move ahead as a group, but has not been able to reach in many times. Many countries are forced to take sides in return for greater economic and political advantage, which in turn has led to bringing back the external influence in local and regional policy making. And if I may take the opportunity, if I give the example of ASEAN, when it comes to the Myanmar issue or the South China Sea issue, we see the ASEAN as a group has itself is divided in multiple places, multiple occasions where certain countries side with the non-ASEAN member states, and the non-ASEAN member states have a different, the observers have a different view of the South China Sea issues. Second example I can give you of South Asia region itself, like SARC. SARC has the power competition between India and Pakistan has led to a largely defunct or regional organization right now. It is except there is one South Asia University which is like non-political South Asia University based out in Delhi. There is a SARC satellite in 2015 it was launched, but Pakistan is not part of this citing the saying the citing security reasons. But beyond that, the SARC itself is largely different, and led by India, it has largely moved into BIMSTEC, the other regional organization, which goes across South Asia towards Southeast Asia, and IOR, IOIP, like Indian Ocean Region Forum, that is again primarily led by the Indian government, and so do other Southeast Asian countries. So this fragmentation do and have occurred. And moving on to the next question that I have received is about evolving role and approach of Indian to Global South. If I have to define India's global approach, I would like to divide it into 4 to 5 different points, sub-points. First would be, especially from the at least since 2014, because it's been 15 years. This government or the party is in the BJP party is in the ruling power. First and foremost, if you see the BJP's formation over the years, since 1980s, since it was formed, their priority has always been the national security. If you pull up their election manifestos, which is widely available in English as well, they largely emphasize on national security almost at every aspect of it. Second comes the neighborhood first policy. The government, at least with the BJP, as long as it's in power, came out with a neighborhood first policy, which again largely emphasized the global south. And we see having like India assisting Sri Lanka in terms of its economic crisis, assisting Nepal and Bhutan in terms of energy crisis, and providing vaccines as not as a selling, it's like giving more like an aid to these countries. And Indian government don't use the word since 1947. I would say Indian government do not use the word aid. The government of India use the word assistance. So it's India's foreign assistance is usually being given and for the neighborhood. And relationship with third would be relationship with major powers that includes US, China, Australia, EU, UK, Japan. So these are the 5, 6 major countries for India's strategic alignment that we see has changed over the years. And next would be taking care of say issues which goes beyond beyond politics. For example, climate change. Uh, Climate change here it comes where the approach of the foreign policy is more for diplomacy for development or leadership on global challenges. One quick example would be Solar Alliance, International Solar Alliance, which India partnered with France to come out with this idea of saying that climate change is for goes across politics, and this is something that we could focus on. And so the countries like which are also not recognized by UN are have largely also been invited to become part of it in terms of creation of more renewable sort of energy sources for energy production. And of course, the last focus is of culture and soft power. The government over the years, from since 60s and 70s, the government have started this something called Pravasi Bharatiya Divas. It's more like for Indian diaspora, and this has seen a major push in terms of pushing India's voices in those countries, not limited to global north or global south. It's like it goes across. The approach is there is 35 million Indian diaspora lives outside of India. And as per the recent statistics that came out in Australia, the Indian-born ethnicity has taken the lead in terms of the population growth in Australia itself. So it shows the kind of power or the connections that the Indian diaspora have. But this brings a lot of challenges to India as well. There is a vision of growing. There's a vision of I saying that okay, we are one of the voices of global south, but it also brings its own challenges. For example, standing strong when it comes to a certain amount of situations that happens in the world, like and there's a famous there's an American diplomat who mentioned that India is the country which always says no. So if you see over the time, over the years in UN, how India has voted in Security Council, it's either abstained or saying no. So that's another reason why many countries don't trust as a like it considered as a big brother by the South Asian countries. Like India voted against the Sri Lankan government during the LTT crisis when there's a civil war. The reason being, again, it was mired by its own domestic politics because the federal government in India could have been collapsed if they have not voted against the Sri Lanka. That again caused like a bad name to India in South Sri Lanka. But it when Nepalese government don't follow what Indian government expected to follow, India stops the gas supply, and it causes a massive crisis. It happened with Bhutan as well. It happened like with the previous governments also. It's not limited to this. So these are some of the challenges, and of course, the bureaucracy is there, red tapeism is there, and there are many further challenges, which I think I'll limit for the discussions. We can have discussions later. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Give applause to Manoj. Thank you once again, Dr. Manoj, for your insight. Yeah, talking about at the beginning strategic choice that countries must maintain that based on economic opportunity, political influence, and also fragmentation in global system with the so many case study from India's experience. Yeah, and now we move to the last but not least speaker. Yeah, we have Pak Makmur. Yeah. Associate Professor Makmur Keliat from Department of International Relations.
Thank you, moderator. Good morning for everybody. And I will start my presentation with the statement that we need first to define what we mean by the global south. Is it a political club? Is it economic club? Without answering that question, I think it is very difficult to talk about the quest of leadership in the context of the global south. I think in the future, we have three challenges that the global south idea should respond to that problem. The first problem is there has been always divergent views on how to transform the spirit of Asia African Conference into reality. In my understanding, there is no a kind of force uniting Asia African Conference. At that time, there was three divergent views. One was stated by Sukarno, who emphasized the idea of anti-neocolonialism. And Sukarno at the time has a tendency to see neocolonialism is part of the Western power. The second one is stated by Nehru. He said that we don't need to direct our attention to the Western power, but we need to strike a balance between the West and the East. At the time, the East was the Soviet Union. And the third one is Kotalawa from the Ceylon. Ceylon said that it is possible also that the new state has aspiration to become a new colonial power. I think this can be understandable because Ceylon was really afraid of India at the time. So how to deal with this ideological divergence? I think till today, this kind of apprehension still give a influence in the global south. Though Indonesia has not so strong in the context of the global south, I think there is a kind of competition between China and India. There is a concern that China is going to use the idea of the global south to fight against the United States. And India, I think, has a doubt whether we fight if we fight the United States by giving China a new dominant power. So I think there is no strong consensus between China and India what should be done insofar as the United States is concerned. I think India, in my understanding, always take what we call it strategic ambiguity. They never have a clear position on the issue of what is going on at the global level. In every issue, they can move from one position to another position. It is a bit different with China. I think China has a tradition to put developing countries as a platform within the foreign policy of China. So I think this should be resolved if you like to strengthen the global side in the future. The third problem is related to the issue of what I call here is structural self-obstruction. In my understanding, the issue of the global south tend to be understood in terms of a state-centric level. There is no strong impetus, strong effort to take the issue into market level and then into the people level. In my understanding, it is still difficult to create a direct connection, even within the South itself. I still remember when I attended a conference in Colombia, long time back, I have to go first to Sydney, and then from Sydney I have to go to United States and then go to Venezuela. There was no direct flight. If we go to Africa, I think we have to go to the north first and then to the south. So it creates a high cost. Same thing happened, I think, in the case of maritime connection. I think rather than talking about the global south at the elite level, we need to make the issue down to the people, down to the market. Let us talk about immigration also. I think this is a practical problem we need to resolve. Next slide, please. some people said that there is a great potential for the South because in terms of trade and in terms of investment, the South has become stronger. But my question is always like this. If this is evident that the South has become stronger, we need to underline the point that this has taken place not because the South, not because the global South has come to exist. It has taken place even before the global South was introduced. So I think sometimes the economists and the economic figure is useless to prove that the cooperation within the South can be improved, because this has taken place even before the global South idea was there. So what we need actually is we have to unite to make the South not only raw material exporter. So we need to downstream our industry. So how could we do that? I think this is the practical problem. Let the decision maker focus to that issue rather than talking about a big thing. So the global South idea needs to be pushed into closer to the people, closer to the market, not only understood at the state-centric level. Okay. I'm not saying that there is no competition between China and India. There is no competition between China, India, vis-a-vis United States. I'm not denying it. But what I'm trying to emphasize is, if we ask people here in Indonesia, even for those at the university, when we talk about the global South, that is not something big for them, because it is still a big idea. So we need to transform that big idea into practical thing, closer to the people. Having said this, next please. I suggest that we need to focus to technical thing, functional thing. We need to deal with how to manage sky gap, how to manage maritime bridge, and how to manage tourism. I think long time back, in 1980s, Nyerere has said strongly that the South should trade with the South. The South should trust itself. So this is, we have to start from the idea and then move to the practical thing. Last presentation is, we need to have a real strategy by focusing on both issue. That is how to find the new funding, and then how to institutionalize local currency settlement. I think many people have read about that, have written about that, and how to downstream our blue economic and digital sovereignty. This is the way we have to focus on, because through this strategy, we strengthen our connectivity. So not only between the South and the North, but mainly between state, between the South state. So having said this, I would like to end my presentation by saying that the South is a good idea, but till today, the South still a kind of symbolic solidarity. We need to transform that idea into a real and concrete things. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Pak Makmur, for your very interesting perspective. Yeah, starting with the philosophical things. Yeah, let us to think. This is a political club or economic club, and then Pak Makmur also remind us to understand about the role of the global south itself. It's not only the ideal things, yeah, but also trying to transform it into the much more practical. Okay, thank you again, Pak Makmur. And now I open to the floor. Today we also invite class from ASEAN Economic Society, yeah. And I invite there for the first term, I invite 3 students, please.
Check. Okay. Thank you for the opportunity. So as introduced by Mas Agung, we come from the ASEAN Economic Community class. So our question would be more or less related to maybe more of the economic or development aspect, and maybe in relative also to ASEAN. So maybe to quote Pak Makmur's presentation as well, our concern is more of how to translate the ideas, the big ideas of the global south coming from the Bandung conference, and then how to translate it into tangible, contextualized to today's realities, especially the economic realities. And again, because we come from the economic community class, so we'd like to address the issue perhaps of the gap. Yeah, well, we'd like to address the question of the gap. How before Pak Makmurs have explained in the last slide on maybe the roadmap on how to change from ideas into economic realities, but also we see borrowing from the ASEAN experience how structural gap between the countries inside ASEAN has been a huge obstacle for ASEAN to reach its goals, and we would like to see how what lessons can we learn from ASEAN's structural gaps into the global south reality, especially in the context of economics or development. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Next.
Okay, so let me introduce myself. I'm Irma. I'm from the ASEAN Economic Community as well. I'd like to ask Mr. Makmur and Miss Susan giving for giving its 2 cents about the Global South leadership, although Mr. Makmur seems kind of pessimistic about it. But I'd like to ask to what extent can Global South leadership serve as a model for ASEAN itself, serving as in addressing structural inequality. So my questions still connect to what Brian asked, particularly structural inequalities regarding access to education, health, and technology. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Irma. And the next one? The Zahir.
Okay. My name is Zakir, and I am also from the ASEAN Economic Community class. And when I was listening to the discussion, what Professor Tang said was interesting regarding the differing circumstances within the global south and the transformation of the role of the global south. And within that context and relating it to ASEAN, I would like to ask for the question regarding to what extent do differing socioeconomic and political conditions within the global south constrain regional leaders such as in ASEAN leaders' ability to pursue inclusive growth under pressures And how might this shape the narrative of Global South leadership in the future?
Okay, thank you, Zahir. Okay, let's move to the first question mentioned by Brian to Pak Makmur. Please, Pak Makmur.
Thank you. The first question is related to the gap between the global south and in the context of ASEAN. I believe in this view that idea unites people. In 1955, the lesson we could got is that anti-colonialism, the consensus at the time is anti-neocolonialism in all of its manifestation. This is the consensus because there was a divergent view inside the conference. Now the question is, what idea unites the South? Anti-US hegemony or anti-institution from the post-Second World War, anti-IMF, anti-World Bank, or anti-multilateralism? What? What unites the South? Imbalances, if you raise that idea, global imbalances between the North and the South. My question is that if we talk about the imbalances, then it is happening also inside the North, within the country. So I think when we talk about the concept imbalances, especially at the global level, then we cannot deny the fact that imbalances also taking place within the South. So there is a great responsibility for the elite that these imbalances at the national level should be resolved first before we raise up the issue at the global level. And I think in this case, China has made a great achievement because I think 2 or 3 years ago, none of people in China has lived under poverty line. So this is a great reputation. This is a great achievement of China. So I think it is very difficult for people, for leaders in the South, saying that there has been a global imbalance, but at the same time, a lot of people within the nation state itself live in a great suffering. So what unites the global South? I think this should be resolved first. In the context of ASEAN, I think with difference, we have an ASEAN Charter. Before that, we have a consensus, what we call it, peaceful conflict resolution. We don't use force to resolve our conflict, our dispute. So we have what we call it Treaty of Amity and Cooperation. In the case of the Global South, I think there is a lot of things need to be done. But the first thing is we have to have strong idea uniting the South. The second one is about I don't know how to answer that question. I think the Global South has not become a model to deal with the issue of poverty. So the model, I think, in my understanding, is the great achievement if you look at China. So, but the model of China, I think, is difficult, very difficult to become a global model because we have a different political tradition. So in the case of Indonesia, for instance, if you say that, please, you have to use China model of development, maybe a lot of people raise what critical view. So I think there is no, so far in my understanding, that there is a model, quote unquote, global South model to deal with the imbalance and poverty. But in the case of ASEAN, I think we have three pillars. We have economic pillar, we have political and security pillar, we have a social community pillar. And the issue of poverty and equality is put under the social and economic community. It is not put under the economic community. So it remains a long way for the global South to become a real model to its members, its member country. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Makmur. Dr. Susan, yeah, you have same question actually about the global South leadership. Yeah, to what extent global South as a model in addressing inequality? Do you have same opinion with Pak Makmur or different insight?
I think I would let me link to a little bit to the first question as well about how much structural gaps between states has made the Third World Project harder, and the current iteration of that gap being around the current round of debt crisis that's shaping the globe. So there's now something like I think it's 80 or 90 states in debt distress, perhaps more. I should have written down the numbers, but the IMF says that 60% of low-income countries are now in debt distress. And it's been really interesting how this current round of debt crises, have we seen over the post-war era, the first debt crisis hit Latin America. We had the Asian financial crisis hitting mostly, ASEAN and Asia, and it spread eventually to Russia and to parts of Latin America. The third crisis, the global financial crisis, these are the big ones, lots of regional ones in between. And this current one now hitting mostly low-income developing states and the countries with precisely the least amount of resources to deal with them. And in terms of leadership, well, this is one where we've not seen much leadership from the South. The South has never really been able to, as far as my observations, to get any coherent view on debt restructuring. There's always been enough global South states that are part of global financial circuits that haven't, wanted to agree to, that have been willing to adopt to the current system that led by the global North, based on informal debt restructuring through, through the group of 20, the Paris Club, and so on. So I do think that first question frames partly the answer to the second question, that the differences between the South are perhaps becoming wider, between the lowest income states in particular at the bottom, who have been, I don't like the term left behind, but I'm struggling for a different one. But there are also models, and I think still today, not just historically, for leadership from the global South. The one that I find inspiring, that is a way to deal with structural inequalities and poverty, is the taxation debate. So I've been very inspired to see action on taxation. Historically, global taxation treaties were dominated by the OECD, which is, of course, a club of the rich states, the northern states, and they currently have this two-pillar process. and the issues about it is it just essentially does not offer global South states any capacity to tax multinational corporations. And so southern states, led by the Africa Bloc in the United Nations, have created a process in the General Assembly that have seen negotiations start on a UN framework convention on international tax cooperation. And as I said, that's been led by the Africa Bloc and the UN, with some great solidarity from the G77 and in places from India and China, though I haven't done enough work on that topic yet to really understand the nuances of who's really getting behind it. But if we want to see a role for leadership that will start to address inequalities, going back to Professor Keliat's or Professor Makmur's, things we need to do. Domestic resource mobilization is there, right? You talked about resource mobilization. That needs to mean not just international. We need domestic resource mobilization, not just through borrowing, but through taxation. And it's only through those sort of processes can we start to get a sense of global social justice, of redistributive justice within, let alone between states. So there's a model.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Susan. Before we move to the third question to Professor Tang, I also invite Dr. Manoj. Do you have any opinion about our discussion?
Thank you. I think I agree with I would say I'm on the same page with our other speakers as well. Like that, what is Global South? As Makmur also mentioned, like the definition of Global South. It's kind of the same, like the competition of. Again, I prefer to give examples because it gives very easy to understand. For example, a textile like garment industries. Bangladesh is well known for its garment industries. The reason the Bangladesh as such prefers to have to be considered as a LDC country, like least developed country, or so called tag that countries are being given, right? Is to get economic benefits or tax benefits. So the moment these countries get upper income or a higher level income, all of a sudden the tax comes back, and these countries usually don't prefer. So again, the competition of who is Global South, what is Global South, is very uh, uh, fragile. I would say, like, very fluid. I'm sorry, not fragile, but very fluid. And at the same time, like, the example of can Global South take leadership? Again, it's a very Professor Engel mentioned about the recent crisis, primarily in the West Asia crisis. We have not seen any sort of collective action in terms of the countries coming together. Now, every country is for its dealing. Let's either reaching out to the United States or reaching out to Iran based on a bilateral basis instead of you see as a group, as like, okay, we are let's say we are ASEAN as a group, or BRICS as a group, or BIMSTEC as a group, or SU as a group. We have not seen the sort of community approach towards the crisis. So it brings to the statements of that it's still fragile, and everyone, its countries are for their own interest, like coming back to the realism, again, the theoretical approach of looking at things. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Manoj. And let's move to the third questions.
Yeah, I think actually not only the third question, but also even the previous two questions, they kind of also linked, because they all talk about a difference in equality gap. But then on the other hand, people also ask whether in this difference, then we can actually find some coherence, find this unification, or through some knowledge transfer, and to drive some more wide, broader development. Yeah, it's basic this, just about within ASEAN or in global south or even globally. And I think actually I can here give you a story of how China actually in its earlier years, which is very poor, really global south in strict sense, it's one of the bottom countries, and then develop. Actually, during that process, one ASEAN country is China's good teacher. I would say it's even maybe the biggest teacher. Do you know who is actually China's teacher in China's development from ASEAN? Which one? It's one of the small countries, Singapore. Singapore, because Singapore itself used to be also very poor. So this actually shows you Singapore was even poor, I think maybe poorer than Indonesia, right, in 1960s. But actually they developed. And China learned from Singapore. And now China also then, you can see, reach this stage. And so that means actually to learn from other countries, even when these countries' conditions are so different, there are a lot of things to learn. Actually, that time, it's about what you learn. It's not to learn the election, not to learn the party system, but to learn how they develop. Yeah, that's actually the common interest and also the coherence of the global south. That I think the global south differentiates global south from this Western country, because the Western country, they have this idea of we need to have liberal democracy, this clear Bretton Woods, we have this standard. Global South, exactly, they don't have this standard institutions or things, but they have the common desire. We think these current institutions, they have problems. We want to reform. We want to find something new which can benefit all of us. But how to benefit all of us, we're still not clear. Actually, that also depends to everybody's effort and about, because it's also not an international thing, but every country, you should be responsible for yourself. Right, so this is, I think, what makes unite and the global south. It's not the idea, but the practice. And this practice, it can be more like an international practice, but also then up to every country's own politics. So there are also, even among global south countries, there are like competition, there are differences. But I think one important thing China sees is actually we should not fight and each other. So that's when we have problems with India on territory. We do not fight with guns. We only fight with fists. So afterwards, then we can still like negotiate and sit down. And the same is even in South China Sea. You can see China, actually China didn't shoot a bullet to a foreign military for almost 40 years. The last one was Vietnam in 1987 or 86. But after that, even during South China Sea, you have controversy. You see, China is kind of has a conflict. But you can see China do not, because of its like power, then try to bullying, try to coerce others with the military power. And I think that shows China's understanding of this global south. We actually should keep this difference, but we should also then, actually China said we do not want to impose our model to anybody. Also do not want you to just copy this model, because China knows that's not copyable, not replicable simplistically. But then China said, however, we want to help. We are willing to help everybody to do business. And because that's also China learned how to develop. China actually learned from Singapore, not because China like invited him to teach, but China make joint venture, attract investment, and then work a lot with Singapore. Now actually a lot of Chinese like to move to Singapore, although the government thinks that's problematic, but as long as it's actually a peaceful economic cooperation, China thinks that's also fine, and it's also it's still okay. And so that's what you see actually the TikTok's CEO is actually a Singaporean, right? It's so this just shows you, I think when you have the Singapore as an example, as a connection point, maybe it's not so far from ASEAN, right? ASEAN can actually get a lot from this China's experience and also can connect with the global south. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor Tang. Okay, now I open the second term, please. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much for the opportunity. My name is Goetza, and I'm from ASEAN economy class as well. And from the presentations, I got that first, like political economy shaped by international, political economies shaped by international structure. Also, a multiple world can like lead into like economic collapse if not done well. And also, like I got from the presentation that India also has a unique development approach that is more adjustable. And to implement it into ASEAN context, we can see that ASEAN member does not have the same capacity, especially when it comes to like opportunity and etc. So my question would be, to what extent can ASEAN reduce internal inequality despite the global constraint? And can India development, adjustable development help ASEAN to reduce the internal inequality on the organizations on itself? Thank you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. My name is Yeremia Lalisang. I'm here with the Department of International Relations, an assistant professor here. I have several observations about this forum. First of all, maybe a disclaimer that I'm not really comfortable with the, state-centric definitions of Global South, state-centric perspective of Global South, because in my understanding, if we only discuss Global South from state-centric point of view, Global South becomes not really interesting in my understanding. Why? Because what we see is quite very rigid arrangements of Global South, because we need to acknowledge that Global South internally consists of conflicts since the very beginning, like the very first slide of Pak Makmur PowerPoints. But Global South should be also viewed beyond this state-centric. And after Bandung Conference, who actually played the most important role in promoting Bandung spirit is the civil society, is the people. Because after 1960s, Bandung spirit is no longer there. Why? Because of the North intervened, all the government, all the regime in the South who promote a very strong anti-colonialism agenda. So the title of this workshop is actually quite state-centric as well. It is like a presumption that Global South should lead. I think it is not really the currency of Global South. Leadership is the idea that Global South should lead, in my understanding, is something that threatening the Global South itself. Because the currency of Global South, in my understanding, should be solidarity rather than leading. Those who have an idea that any of power in Global South should lead should be perceived suspiciously, just as Kotelawala said. He might be the new oppressors in different phases. So I just want to shift our attentions a little bit. Maybe if we see the currency then among Global South is solidarity, then the kind of framework that we are talking about among us is more like exchange, sharing, rather than copying model, rather than compete with each other. Yeah, that's my first point. My second point to Pak Makmur's presentations is, since 1955, I think global Souths also trade with each other. And China, then in that kind of framework, we could say that China has a very big commitment in promoting trade or investment among the global South. Let's take the example China's involvement in Africa, yeah, Indonesia with its own South-South cooperations, for example, something like that. But is that really like the standard that we want if we talk about relations among global South? Because we know China's involvement in Africa could not be perceived in all positive point of view. Our downstreaming, our China-backed downstreaming, could we regard that as a model South-South, how to say, South-South collaborations or whatever you want to label it? But we need to acknowledge that my point is why I think South-South country are prevented from expanding its trade relations because it's against the market logic itself. If we trade more with the South, for example, if we sell whatever our manufacturing product to Bangladesh instead of China, it will be a total joke for Indonesia as well, right? So my point is, we are prevented from expanding the trade between ourselves, thanks to neoliberal capitalism, of course. That's the thing. So that's why what I'm trying to say is there is something that prevent the southern countries to promote how to say, trust or relations among themselves, because we so far have not managed to fight or challenge the established Bretton Woods system, or whatever you call it, the established neoliberal capitalism promoted by the North. That's why maybe if we shift the perspective towards solidarity, then we will talk about different things today. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mas Yere. If the first question, I think it's directly to Pak Makmur and Manoj. I think for Mas Yere reflections and fit, I think it's better to open to all of the speakers to give such a response. Okay. Okay. Wait. We have one. The last students, please.
Okay, good afternoon to our panel speakers. Hello, my name is Olivia. I'm from Group 4 of the ASEAN Economic Community class. And this is upon our discussion, we would like to ask a question. Upon the ongoing fluidity of the concept and discussion regarding the Global South definition and what we should prioritize, we have observed that through media circulation that ASEAN does not, as a regional association, ASEAN is seemingly trying not to confine itself to the traditional notions of developing solidarity. It tries to position itself transcending beyond the binary category of global North and also global South. So our question is, how can our region, ASEAN, strategically position itself in the middle of that crossroads? And how can its flexible yet seemingly overlapping collaborative style may contribute in narrowing down the development gap issue within its member state and further strengthen the position of Global South within the current global political and economic landscape? Thank you.
Thank you, Livia, for your questions. Okay, maybe I open to Professor Tang for the first.
Start and yeah, I think what Jeremy mentioned this view on global south, and that's also Professor Mahmoud said this more philosophical reflection. That's worth kind of more thinking, because that actually touch it's about our understanding of global south should not be just like a new block, like in the Cold War, like just a replacement of the global north, but it actually suggests some like fundamental change of a trend, because what we see is the global south first. Indeed, that's not really so like united. So when you say we need a solidarity, but in fact most of the countries in this global south, they have their own considerations. They also from their practical like business economic relationship, they may even more willing to work with the global north for business linkage. So what actually really makes this global south actually important is just it's about now time to change, I would say. It's actually the change. It's first, it's maybe this political economic structure. We see the rise of many non-Western developing countries. But also together with that is the change of the system, like Bretton Woods and IMF. These traditional behaviors maybe need to change. But also more fundamentally, I am now thinking, this actually regards our political science. Maybe we also need to change our perception of international relations. Because a lot of this Cold War and this Western hegemony, they are based on a concept which is also the basis of our IR or political science. That's the power. That's also about the state-centric. You always think whether China has a big power, India has a big power, or the smaller country, how can we increase our power? But power is intrinsically actually kind of exclusive. They actually power, you have power, that means it's kind of zero-sum game. When you have power, then I will have less power. So you always cause the friction, cause the struggle. But in fact, I find currently for the majority of the world, so the global south, that I think the Russians have it's right. So say referring global south not just as like a group, but more like a majority of the world. What they are thinking. For us, we just want like a peaceful development. We want a more like a harmonious society. We also want our culture to get developed, not only like just following some the Washington, what they told us, but we want to see our culture, our tradition prosper. So this is something actually not really about culture, not really about power. Right? It's actually just about everybody. You can have your autonomy. You can have develop, and you can. All the countries, they see their own autonomous development without harming others. And I think that will be the more fundamental trend for now the global, the majority. We try to find out the way of our development. But however, in the current world, to do that, we need international cooperation. We need to move up. And I think the China and like Indians growth, also Singapore, ASEAN's past decades growth, they suggest, they actually indicate clearly this when these countries develop, it actually doesn't necessarily mean the loss of others, but it just means actually all the countries can grow. Yeah, which countries suffer loss? It's only this country who think their privilege and think their hegemony are detrimented. Like that guy in White House, he's thinking about make America great again. It's just America still dominates the whole world, right? When now we see if he in this mindset, then they think they are losing. But actually, for the global, for other countries, when they do not want to become hegemony, and other countries develop, even contribute to your own development. That's also China and Singapore, this cooperation, what they find, right? We actually should increase and continue this global collaboration so that we can all profit even more. And I think that will solve maybe a lot of this, puzzles. Just maybe my 2 cents.
Thank you, Professor Tang. Let's move to Dr. Manoj.
Okay, thank you. I just quickly want to reconfirm the question. How can India adjust development and help with the ASEAN? If you can help me to ask, let me know the question again. I kind of messed it up.
So actually the questions is like, because I see from the presentation that India has more of like a flexible and also adjustment when it comes to like a development structure and also a development agenda. How can ASEAN also, if ASEAN can implement that, how can ASEAN do such a thing as India? Because we can see that ASEAN comes from like a different country with a different background. And I think like the adjustment within India can also help ASEAN build into a stronger institutions.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for the question. I think if you look, it's very unfair for both ASEAN and India because ASEAN is a regional bloc and India is a country, right? We, as a country, it do not have to, do not face the challenges as a group of nations face. Given its own population that the ASEAN have, historically ASEAN have been trying to be a middle regional group, try to like see it like all the major powers are it's as an observer status, and ASEAN have bilateral or strategic level meetings with all of these countries and with each other. And for example, India ASEAN, they signed the free trade agreement in 2015, and India is one of the first, one of the top few countries which is ASEAN as a group have a very close trade relationship. With again, what ASEAN can do, I don't think I'm at the position of saying that what ASEAN can do to be more flexible. I think if Makmur can help me on this part aspect, so that will be helpful. But coming quickly, just touching upon the points raised by Pak Ereme as well, that South do not trade with each other enough. That's completely true. For example, if I say from the region, South Asia, uh, India and Pakistan, there's almost like negligible, even though we share boundaries, but there's almost like negligible trade between the two. So there's a joke that it's easier to import from US for each of those countries rather than trading between each other or for any third country. For example, again, let's say India and China, Professor Tang mentioned about the challenges, also the border challenges that both countries face. With each other. If you see the India-China trade, it's more than $100 billion per year. Out of this, India export maybe $20 billion or less to China, and the rest is all imported. There's a massive trade imbalance. If you see the reason why it is being also is that the strong points where India have in terms of trade, for example, pharmaceuticals, service industries, and few other industries which I'm not able to recollect right now. These are the major, especially the pharmaceutical industries. They have not get the enough clearance from the Chinese side for like to kind of reduce this sort of trade imbalance. And whenever there is a conflict between India and Pakistan, is the India-China trades comes at a casualty, citing for different geopolitical reasons. So yes, that's kind of some of my final comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Manoj. Let's move to Dr. Susan.
Thank you. Thank you, Pak Jeremy, for the question. I mean, this is exactly where, if I started, that I don't see the question through a purely state lens. That going back to the third world project, the third world being a project, not a place. And my opening remarks focus very much on the role of civil society and leadership. But not just political leadership from organic intellectuals. And I wanted to celebrate your comments around solidarity. If I link that to the first question about India possibly as a role model for reducing inequality, India's not heading in the right direction when it comes to its inequality data. Wealth inequality has gone in the last 20 or so years from the top 10% owning 45% of the country's wealth to the top 10% owning 65% of the country's wealth. I mean, it's Gini index, which is a measure of inequality. It's not as bad as Singapore yet, but unless there are some actions taken towards it, it will take us towards that. And how we address questions like inequality comes not to me from models from other countries, but from political projects within states and between states. Solidarity, going back to Pak Jeremy's point, that we need political movements and resistance, and in Australia at the moment, the big project is to try and get our government to tax natural resource companies fairly, to ensure they actually pay some tax. The problem in Australia is the big multinational corporations will spend as much as they need to get rid of governments, to discredit political leaders that try and tax them. And so this is where we need huge solidarity projects to ensure that political systems change to address issues like inequality. It's not just state leadership. And finally, on the issue of trade, I mean, I think that trade imbalances are an issue. And so I'm going to disagree with you here, Professor Tang, that whether that was the US huge trade imbalances, ongoing Singaporean trade imbalances, and now US went from huge trade surpluses to huge trade deficits, and now China, it creates huge financial instability globally when you have certain states running huge balances and certain states running huge deficits. And the only mechanism internationally through the International Monetary Fund that the US created was to only put pressure on surplus states to adjust their economy. That we can't have long-run global financial stability and a system that allows states to develop along their own developmental lines, not just capitalist ones, if we only have pressure on deficit states to adjust and surplus states can go on exporting as much as they want to. And yeah, so, and that's the system that was set up under the IMF. And if you think in contrast, this debate between the US and the British at Bretton Woods, the British reflecting their own interest, Keynes wanted a system that pushed both deficit and surplus states to adjust. The US system, US insisted it would only be on deficit states. And the resultant trade system then came, and monetary system came to not work for them, except for the exorbitant privilege that they have been able to keep through the role of the US dollar. So this is not a functional system for a more just global order. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Susan. Pak Makmur?
Thank you. Mas Heri, you raise a difficult question, and suddenly I feel I am having a better appetite now because this is going to have a lunch. I agree with you that the idea of solidarity, because the society approach always say that there is a kind of a spirit within the society to create what we call it solidarity. But at the international level, we need to accept the fact also that power politics is there. Sometimes I feel that should we define the global south is solidarity with empathy or solidarity without empathy? I think this is the question we have to answer together. Here in Indonesia, we talk much about board of peace. I think that is the product of a Security Council. Resolution, I think, if I'm not mistaken, 1225, or I don't remember. But the point is that that declaration issued by Security Council given a difficult position for many countries. China and Russia did not veto. They are just abstain. But after that resolution was issued, a lot of things happened. What I am trying to say is, we cannot answer the question without taking into consideration the power politics. Why China take the position of abstain? Why Russia took the similar position? I think geopolitical consideration is there. We cannot deny the fact. So, when you said that the global south is a kind of solidarity, I agree with you. But should we define the global south is a idea solidarity without empathy? So it is a big and difficult question. Second one, with regard to the idea of equality, how ASEAN will deal with the issue. In my view, inequality is under the responsibility of national government. We have the instrument, fiscal and monetary policy instrument. The issue of inequality becomes international and regional issue if the inequality is being transformed into security issue. What the people said here is securitization. If because of the inequality is too big here that can lead to instability, then Singapore will see Indonesia. Because if something happen here, there is a riot, there is instability, it will affect Singapore. It will affect Malaysia. And people will come. Let us work together to deal with the issue of inequality. But it is because they affect the strategic balance in Southeast Asia. So what I am trying to say is the issue of inequality is under the responsibility of national government. It is not under the responsibility of regional organization because we have the tax, we have the inflation, all of these things, and that issue become regional responsibility if inequality lead to regional instability. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Makmur. Okay, that's the point to close our sessions. Yeah, I think I don't want to conclude, but we learned many things about this from this seminar. We learned that the transformation of global South itself. We learned about the leadership within the global South remains complex, contested, yeah, evolving, and it from this discussion left us so many things to be room to discuss. Yeah. I hope this is not the last, but we will continue room to collaborate more. Thank you again for all of the speakers. Prof. Tang, yeah, Pak Makmur, Dr. Susan and Dr. Manoj for your insight. Thank you again to all the organizing committees and all of the participants that come today. Thank you again. This is the end of this international seminar. Thank you.
Thank you.